I've always believed the quietest moments are the loudest. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, but presses into your chest makes it hard to breathe. That's the kind of silence I walked into that day. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 38, a project director at a mid-sized firm based in Raleigh, North Carolina. And until that afternoon, I thought I knew what it meant to protect my family. I had flown home early 2 days ahead of schedule from a leadership retreat in Chicago. I couldn't wait to surprise my husband Mark, and most of all, our daughter Grace. She's 8, full of questions, messy drawings, and giggles that echo through the house like music. I had missed her more than I expected. I stepped into our home expecting exactly that: laughter cartoons, maybe even her telling a joke badly, and Mark pretending it was hilarious. But when I opened the front door, I was met with something else entirely. A stillness that made the hairs on my neck stand up. There was no sound, just the faint rhythmic squeaking of a sponge against tile and the sharp synthetic smell of bleach hanging in the air. I followed the noise. The sight that met me in the kitchen broke something inside me. Grace, my baby, was on her hands and knees, clutching a giant yellow sponge with her raw red hands. Her face was wet-streaked with silent tears. The floor was already spotless. Her little body shook with each motion. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just moved. Kneeling, I gently pried the sponge from her hand and wrapped her in my arms. She didn't say a word, just collapsed into me like her bones had disappeared. Her sobs were tiny, but they felt like thunder inside my chest. "Sweetheart," I whispered, brushing the hair off her damp cheek. "Where's Grandma? Where's Grandpa?" She pressed her face into my shoulder and barely mumbled. "They went to Adventure Cove with Abby." "Abby, my niece, Mark's sister's daughter." "Why didn't they take you?" I asked. She sniffled. Her voice was barely audible. "Grandma said I had to be punished for spilling juice. She said I needed to learn my place." My heart stopped for a second. Grace didn't need to say more, and I didn't push her to. I held her tighter and rocked her gently right there on the cold kitchen floor. I noticed a tiny raw spot on her knuckle, probably from scrubbing too hard. My baby was cleaning floors, while her so-called grandparents rode roller coasters with their real granddaughter. This wasn't new. That was the worst part. It wasn't out of nowhere. It was just the first time it was this loud. We had adopted Grace when she was only 6 months old. She was ours in every way that mattered, and legally too. Mark signed every paper, sat through every interview. We wanted her more than we had ever wanted anything in our lives. She is our daughter. But to his parents, Diane and Frank Carter, she was always something else. An asterisk. A footnote. Christmas was the most obvious memory. Just last year, Abby had gotten a 3-level Barbie dream house. Grace unwrapped a clearance rack sweater, the tag still clinging to the itchy fabric. I remember Mark just sighed at the time, murmuring, "You know my parents. They're old school." But this wasn't old school. This was a and then curled up on the couch, a blanket eating Play-Doh ice cream straight out of the tub. That was our baby. Her tiny hand rested in mine, and slowly, for the past 3 months, Diane had been taking Abby out to the zoo, to the movies for donuts and frozen yogurt. Grace left behind, alone, with a chore list. Bathrooms, white dishes she didn't use, and when she spilled the juice that night, Diane looked her dead in the eye and said, "It's a shame, but blood is thicker than water." Grace didn't fully understand what that meant, but I did. I understood exactly. When Mark walked through the door an hour later, the second he saw Grace's swollen eyes, her bandaged hand, and the look on my face, he froze. I didn't need to say anything. He sat down beside us, pulled her into his arms, and whispered, "I'm so sorry, baby. I didn't protect you. I swear. This will never ever happen again." I didn't say a word. I just nodded. But inside, something was building. Quietly. Coldly. like a storm forming at the edge of the ocean. And it would hit soon. That night, sleep didn't come. Grace eventually drifted off beside me on the couch, her soft breathing rising and falling in rhythm with the whir of the ceiling fan. Mark sat in the recliner across from us, his elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The guilt in his eyes cut me deeper than any words could. "I let this go on too long," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "I've been brushing it off, hoping they'd change. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because it wasn't just this weekend. It was every dismissive comment Diane had ever made. Every time Frank ignored Grace, when she ran to show him her crayon drawings. Every family gathering where she was the afterthought and Abby the star. I thought maybe it was just—" Mark sighed, looking at the floor. "Them being awkward, not knowing how to bond with an adopted child. But this was cruel." I looked at him then, really looked at him. And I saw it. The war inside him between loyalty and rage, between the little boy who still wanted his parents' approval and the father who would burn down the world for his child. "They said she needed to learn her place," I whispered. "What place is that mark beneath them?" His face twisted. "Number. Not anymore." It was close to 8 p.m. when the front door opened and their laughter filled the hallway. Diane's voice rang out first, all smugness and glee. That funnel cake was amazing. Abby had powdered sugar everywhere. Then they stepped into the living room and froze. Diane blinked, her smile faltering. "Emily," she said, "you're back early." "Where were you?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "We took Abby to Adventure Cove," she replied, still oblivious. "She had such a good time." "Why was Grace left home alone?" Mark asked, stepping forward. His voice wasn't loud, but it was tight-strained, like a wire ready to snap. "She needed to learn responsibility," Diane said, waving a dismissive hand. "She made a mess." "She spilled juice," I said flatly. "She's 8. That's old enough to clean up after herself," Diane sniffed. "Children these days are too soft." Then Frank finally chimed in, stepping out from behind his wife. "We're just trying to protect this family's future," he said. Mark stared at him. "What does that even mean?" But Frank didn't answer. Instead, Diane stepped forward, her voice going icy. "Frankly, she's not our real granddaughter." The air was sucked out of the room. I stood frozen, stunned by the bluntness, the shamelessness of it. Mark looked at his mother like she was a stranger. Every shred of tolerance, of rationalization burned away. "You've chosen your blood," he said, his voice trembling. "Now we're choosing our family." Then he turned to them and said the words that changed everything. "I want you to pack your things and leave our house." Their mouths dropped open in unison, like synchronized puppets that had lost their strings. "You can't be serious," Diane whispered. "You can't do this," Frank added, stepping forward. But Mark didn't flinch. He stood taller, voice steadier. "This is not up for debate. You hurt my daughter. You disrespected my wife. You crossed every line that matters." I walked over and stood beside him, placing my hand on his back. We were united. We were done. The next morning, the fallout began. My phone buzzed constantly. First it was Aunt Patty, then Cousin Rachel, then Uncle James, each one more indignant than the last. "How could you kick them out after everything they've done for you? They're old, Emily. You can't expect them to be perfect. You're being dramatic." "So, what if they made a mistake?" Mistake: my daughter had been forced to scrub a floor on her hands and knees while her cousin was off eating cotton candy and riding roller coasters. That wasn't a mistake. That was intentional. Mark was pacing the living room by lunchtime, jaw clenched so tight I could hear the grind of his teeth. "They're spinning the story," he muttered. "She's telling everyone you're sensitive, and I've been brainwashed. That we threw them out like trash. They always want to control the narrative," I said. "They hate losing control." Then he said something that made me stop in my tracks. "It's just weird," Mark said. "Over the last month, Dad's been asking me nonstop about your new project, the Genesis Initiative. Like obsessed with it. Asking what vendors you're meeting, where the dinner's being held." I thought he was just trying to make conversation. I blinked. The Genesis Project. The dots started connecting in my mind like constellations. The desperate way Frank had asked me weeks ago, "Have you guys picked your local partners yet?" The time Diane casually mentioned how Frank's construction company had just expanded into commercial work. And that line from last night, protecting the family's future. This wasn't just emotional manipulation, it was a setup. Frank had been angling for a contract. A big one. And Diane, she was trying to curry favor in the only way she knew how, by punishing the child she thought was in the way. My fingers were ice cold as I grabbed the calendar from the fridge. "That dinner," I said slowly. "The one with all the potential subcontractors and partners. It's tonight." Mark looked up. "You're not thinking, oh, I'm thinking," I said, standing straighter. "We're going. Not to cause a scene. Not to scream or fight. We're just going to let them show themselves for who they are." His eyes met mine, and he nodded. The restaurant was one of those sleek downtown spots, with valet parking and dim lighting, that made everyone look a little more important than they were. Waiters glided between tables, like shadows balancing trays of champagne and filet mignon. It was the kind of place people whispered deals over and shook hands with careful smiles. Mark and I walked in together, hand in hand. I wore a navy blue dress I hadn't touched in months, something that said professional without being cold. Mark looked sharp in a charcoal blazer, his expression set. I could feel his pulse in his fingers, strong, steady, but with a current of something just beneath the surface. Resolve, maybe. Rage held in check. We weren't there to make a scene. We were there to be seen. We found our table near the center of the room, tucked in the soft glow of an overhead pendant light. From across the dining area, I spotted Frank and Diane already there, huddled near Mr. Harrington, my CEO laughing a little too loudly. Diane's hand fluttering toward his sleeve like they were lifelong friends. Frank's posture was stiff, his shoulders squared, probably practicing his pitch in his head for the 100th time. I caught Diane's eye. Her smile froze the moment she saw us. Mark and I sat down quietly. We chatted with the other guests at our table, two architects and a city official from Charlotte. I kept my tone light, composed. I didn't bring up family. I didn't bring up work. I just let the room breathe, let the whispers begin to build. It didn't take long. Within 20 minutes, Mr. Harrington made his rounds. When he reached our table, Diane practically materialized from behind him, sugary, sweet, and glowing with artificial warmth. "Oh, Mr. Harrington," she gushed, slipping into the conversation like an uninvited plus one. "Isn't it just wonderful the work Emily does? She's such a brilliant leader, and such a loving mother to her little adopted girl. We believe in strong families, after all." Her voice dripped with condescension, every syllable calculated to sound generous, but it wasn't praise, it was possession. Mark stiffened beside me. I smiled. "Thank you, Diane." I said, my voice level, my words slow. "You're right, family is everything. And in our home, we value things like integrity, compassion, and protecting the people we love." Diane blinked. Mr. Harrington tilted his head, curious now. "I believe those values," I continued, shifting my gaze directly to him, "are the same ones we should look for in our business partners." He nodded. "Absolutely." I leaned forward slightly. "And speaking of integrity, it's the cornerstone of the Genesis project. In light of some new information I've come across, I believe a more thorough vetting process for all subcontractor candidates is necessary, especially to ensure their values align with ours. Completely." There it was. Clean, professional, and direct. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. A hush swept over the table like a cold wind. Diane's face had gone pale, her smile dropping by degrees. Frank, who had been hovering at a nearby table, froze mid-step. His expression shifted instantly from eager to gray, like someone watching their house burn down in slow motion. Mr. Harrington looked from me to Frank and back again. He gave a subtle nod, his tone shifting. "Excellent point, Emily," he said coolly. "Thank you for your diligence. We'll make sure every candidate is fully reviewed before moving forward." Then he turned his attention, his body, and his tone completely away from Diane. "Mr. Wilson," he said to Frank, voice clipped. "Let's postpone our discussion." Indefinitely. It was a knife to the gut served with wine and polite applause. Frank stood there like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. Diane tried to recover, sputtering about how misunderstood they'd been, but the conversation had already moved on. We had made our point without screaming, without rage. Just truth. That kind of truth doesn't echo. It settles. As the evening wound down, Mark and I made our way to the exit. We passed Frank and Diane near the coat check. Their expressions had crumbled from indignant to desperate. "Emily, wait!" Frank said, reaching out. Mark stepped in front of me. Not with anger, but with finality. "This was never about business, Dad," he said softly. "This was about Grace. You used my wife to try to secure a contract while Mom was making my daughter feel like she didn't belong in her own home." Frank opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. "You made your choice," Mark finished. "Now we're making ours." He turned to Diane. "Don't call us. Don't write. And don't ever try to see Grace again." I didn't look back. We stepped outside into the warm night air. The moonlight caught the soft waves in my hair as I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. We had taken back our power, not with vengeance, but with conviction. And it wasn't just for us. The days that followed were eerily calm, like the moment after a thunderstorm, when the air still buzzes with electricity, but the sky is silent. No more phone calls, no more texts, no more attempts to twist the truth. Frank and Diane had gone quiet, finally realizing that their grip had broken, and not just on us, but on the narrative they'd clung to for years. We didn't celebrate. There was no champagne. Just a long weekend spent at home, as a family, baking cookies, building blanket forts in the living room, and letting Grace be loud and messy and 8 years old. But as peaceful as those days were, they weren't empty. They were healing. The Saturday after the dinner, Grace came into our room with a notebook. Its pink cover was decorated with glittery stickers, cats, cupcakes, and a wobbly rainbow drawn in marker. She climbed up between us on the bed, holding it to her chest. "I want to make a book," she said, "about our family. But like, our book, with rules." "Rules," Mark smiled. "Like what?" Grace shrugged. "Like real rules. About how we treat each other. And pizza night has to be in there." I blinked, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Okay, baby. Let's write it together." That's how the Carter Family Charter was born. It started as something simple, just a way for Grace to express what she needed, to feel safe, to feel loved. But as we added to it, one scribbled page at a time, it became something deeper. A contract, a foundation. Rule number 1, love makes a family. Rule number 2, we always listen, even when it's hard. Rule number 3, Friday night is pizza and movie night, no excuses. Some rules were silly. No broccoli on Saturdays was one of Grace's additions, but most of them were raw, honest, and written in crayon. We pasted in photos us in the backyard blowing bubbles. Grace at the beach in her sun hat. The three of us at a fall festival last year, her face painted like a butterfly. We filled the pages with memories, little jokes, and even drawings. It became our way of saying, "This is who we are. This is what matters." One night, after Grace had gone to bed, I sat in the living room staring at the book. It was propped open on the coffee table, open to a page with a large, uneven heart that Grace had drawn around. Rule number 1. Mark joined me silently, handing me a cup of tea. "You thinking about them?" I nodded. "Sometimes I feel like I should have seen it sooner," he said quietly. "What were they doing to her?" "To us." "You were taught to see them as your parents first," I replied. "That's hard to unlearn." He rubbed the back of his neck. "My dad, he always used to say, family comes first." I think I believe that even when they started treating Grace like she was second class, I thought if I kept the peace, it would get better. "You weren't wrong for wanting peace," I said gently. "You just didn't see the cost." He looked at me. What if they try to come back? They might, I admitted. But we don't owe them access to our lives. Not after what they did. He exhaled, slowly nodding. I just keep thinking about what Dad said about protecting the family's future. He wasn't talking about Grace. Or us. He meant his future, his business, his image. I took his hand, and we showed him what protecting a family looks like. That night, I wrote my addition to the family charter in pen on the inside back cover. 3 weeks passed. Then a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address, but I recognized Diane's cursive instantly. My stomach tightened as I opened it. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. It was a list of grievances, how hurt they felt, how unfair we'd been, how misunderstood. There was a paragraph insisting they hadn't meant to hurt Grace, followed immediately by a line about how discipline is love. They still didn't get it. They probably never would. I folded the letter once, then again, and dropped it into the trash. Grace never saw it. Instead, she saw us fully present, fully hers. She started to smile more often. Her drawings became brighter, bolder. At school, her teacher told me she'd raised her hand in class for the first time in weeks. The shadows were fading. Still, it wasn't all perfect. Some nights, Grace asked quiet questions. Why doesn't Grandma like me? Or was it my fault? We never lied. We told her the truth, at least the version she could understand. Sometimes people love the idea of family, I told her once. But they don't know how to love the real thing. That's not your fault. That's on them. One Friday night during a movie marathon, Grace leaned against me and whispered, "I'm glad they're not here." I brushed her hair back. Me too. And I meant it. Because we weren't just surviving anymore. We were becoming. It was a Sunday morning in early spring when I realized the silence in our house had changed. The stillness that once carried the weight of fear and tension had transformed into something warm, like the hush of sunlight coming through windows. The kind of quiet where you could hear a pencil scratching paper, a soft hum of music in the background, or the sound of Grace humming to herself while she drew. We were finally living, not just enduring. Mark had started therapy, something he'd resisted for years. He was confronting pieces of himself I think he hadn't even realized had been shaped by his parents' expectations about masculinity, obedience, and control. The more he unpacked, the lighter he seemed. More like the man I married, and more importantly, the father Grace deserved. Grace had bloomed. There was no other word for it. She had joined a little art club at school and had started telling jokes again, bad ones mostly. Knock-knock jokes with no punchline, or ones that trailed off into giggles before the end. But every time she laughed, we did too. One night, she brought her family charter to the dinner table with a big announcement. I added a new rule, she declared proudly, flipping to the last page where her shaky handwriting read. Mark's eyes welled up. Mine did too. She looked up at us, chewing her bottom lip. Even if it's about someone in the family, right? Yes, honey, I said, reaching across the table. Especially then. That's when I knew. She wasn't just healing, she was becoming strong in the ways they had tried to break. We hadn't just removed the poison, we had replaced it with a purpose. We went on a small road trip that spring, just the three of us. We drove to Asheville, stayed in a cozy cabin, roasted marshmallows, and hiked trails lined with blooming wildflowers. At night, Grace curled up between us and whispered stories she made up on the spot, ones where she was the hero, brave and brilliant, always saving the day. One night Mark turned to me after Grace had fallen asleep. "I keep thinking about that last thing my dad said," he murmured. "About protecting the family's future." I nodded, the words still echoing in my mind. Funny thing is, he was right. Mark looked at me confused. "He just didn't realize we are the future," I said softly. "Not his business. Not their legacy. Us. This." We never responded to that letter Diane sent. There was no point. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about rewriting the story in her favor. but our story no longer belonged to her. It never had. We were writing our pages now. By summer, Grace had drawn a new cover for the family charter. Bright yellow with the three of us in stick figure form, she had given herself wings. Because she said, "I get to fly now." I took a photo of it and kept it as my phone background. One night, I sat alone in the living room, the moonlight spilling through the window like milk across the hardwood floor. The family charter sat on the coffee table, slightly curled at the corners, worn with love. I opened it to the first page, tracing the crayon-written words with my fingertips. We hadn't been perfect. We hadn't always known what to do. But we had chosen to fight to rebuild brick by brick, not with bitterness, but with belief. Belief in grace, belief in ourselves, belief in the idea that love is something you build, not just something you inherit. Because family isn't fate. It's a choice. It's a quiet decision to open the door again after being hurt. To choose kindness over cruelty. To protect what matters even when it's hard. Even when it costs you comfort, reputation, or connection to people who will never understand. That choice had changed everything. In the stillness of that evening, I closed the charter and rested my hand on top of it. Our fortress was standing. Not because it had never been tested, but because we had built it ourselves. And brick by brick love had made it strong. In the quiet aftermath of betrayal, we found clarity. When I, Emily Carter, returned home early from a business trip, I discovered my 8-year-old daughter Grace scrubbing the kitchen floor with red raw hands left behind, while my in-laws took their real granddaughter to an épus cried amusement park. That moment shattered the illusion I had clung to for years that silence and tolerance would protect my family. It didn't. That silence allowed cruelty to flourish. What followed was a quiet reckoning. My husband Mark finally confronted the truth about his parents Diane and Frank and stood beside me in protecting our daughter. A confrontation at home led to a deeper unraveling when we realized Frank's actions weren't just about control, they were part of a calculated attempt to gain favor and secure a business deal through my leadership role in a major project. At a formal dinner, I didn't raise my voice, I raised a boundary. In front of my boss and peers, I ended their influence not with rage but with truth. The fallout was immediate. Their power collapsed, their access revoked. And in the silence that followed, we started to heal. We created the Carter Family Charter, our own rules written in crayon and love, guided by what Grace needed to feel safe. Through laughter, tears, and honesty, we became stronger. Not perfect, but real. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation, of choosing love over blood, of learning that family is not a birthright. It's a choice made every day in how we show up, how we protect, and how we love. We built our fortress from the ground up, not with walls to keep people out, but with values that lift us. And this time, no one will ever take it from us again.